Hello! Well, here we are again, another episode of the Drunken Irish Reader. Hopefully you can understand me a bit more now because I've got a decent microphone. I've got one of these big bulbs things. Yeah, it looks a bit rude. Fanar. Have you ever listened to or ever read Viz magazine? You will get the reference. But then again, I may just be Roger irrelevant. God, you won't get that one. Right. Purpose of this podcast. Am I a podcast guy, or am I a YouTuber, or am I a complete utter fuckwits, or am I just going to need another drink? Probably that. You'll get a lot of that, a lot of this in the upcoming video, because we have got the guy that actually narrated Traitors, Michael Abels, and his wife Kelly Abels, who isn't actually in this one. I'm not sure what she was doing. Probably supplying Michael with a drink and ice for his scotch, which apparently he doesn't normally have ice in scotch. And apparently he doesn't normally curse either. And apparently Traitors is Michael's instruction on how to curse, which I am really proud of. Cheers. So yeah, the upcoming video is hilarious. He actually reads my book as well, which is fine, but you should really watch it. Come on.
Hi, I'm Michael Abels. I'm a I'm a professional voice actor who can't say professional voice actor. And this is a small batch 1792 bourbon. I'm sending this one down to check on its friends that went down earlier. I'm not sure what's going on with them, so he's going to go in and find out. That just sounded stupid. For those of you who know me, you're asking, I'm sure, what's the deal with the ice? You don't drink it on the rocks. Well, I'll tell you. After exhaustive research, I have discovered that ice makes it healthy. Anyway. C.J. Rutherford wrote, oh, you've already heard the intro at this point, the prologue. You already know what he wrote. It's Traitors, Book 1 of the Divine Conflict. And a few years ago, he had it out, looking for a voice actor who could do the different parts, and I talked to him about it, and he asked if we could do both male and female, and I sent him a demo, just a little reading of a couple of different parts. I did most of it. Jazz and Ted and all the guys, and just the general narration of the book. And my wife portrayed Jennifer. And he immediately sent back saying, I could tell that's not you doing the female voice. You see, we had a bit of a misunderstanding. I thought he was looking for two actors. He was just looking for one that could do both parts. But he liked the way it sounded. I liked the way it sounded. And so that's what we wound up doing. I did everything except for the Jennifer stuff, and my wife, Kelly, is Jennifer. So that's cool. Here we are sometime later. And CJ says, hey, you know that book we both make a little bit of money off of because people buy it? Let's record ourselves and other people reading parts of it and give it away for free. Thanks. It's a great idea. It's fine. It's a good idea. I mean, the world what it is. Why not? Whole bunch of us are staying home and looking for things to do, and why not check out a free audiobook with some video? I don't know if you can hear that or not, but we have a heck of a storm rolling through my part of Texas right now. It's 0218 on Saturday, the 20th of June, 2020. Oh, it'll be 0220 2020 shortly. It's June. We got to throw a 6 in there somewhere. Anyway, all right. So, well, there's 4 minutes worth of rambling. Should get on with it. So I'm going to read chapter 1 once again. Treaters, Book 1 of the Divine Conflict. Written by C.J. Rutherford. Narrated by Michael and Kelly Abels, and now, several other people. Chapter 1. Boys and Their Toys. Anything yet? Ted asked. His downturned face looked perpetually sad. I knew better. I saw the line on his rod jerk. Nope, you? My own monofilament swam busily from side to side on the port, playing me as much as I played Ted. We both knew we had something. It was tradition to let the excitement play out, just like jigging a line. Ted looked at his green-gilled little brother in affectionate disgust. The lake was a mirror with barely a ripple, but Bill sat in the middle of the boat, hugging a puke bucket. Johnny, the oldest of the 3 brothers, winked at me before swaying to one side, causing the boat to rock. Jerk. Would you tell him to stop doing that? Bill looked up at me, pleadingly. I nodded. Cut it out, man, shit. My rod bent almost in half. I got a strike. No, I got her. We'd been coming to the lodge I owned on this lake for 10 years, in hopes that one of us might catch her. My father had first told me about her when I was 3 years old. He called her Nessie, after the legendary Scottish sea monster. But this beast was real. Or so he said. The lodge we were staying in had been his. I had inherited it from him, as he had inherited it from his own father, my Grandpa Willie. But their stories were always the same. They were out on the lake one day with their dog in the boat. Buster had started to bark, those irritating, challenging barks that a dog never stops. Next thing, the hugest catfish ever burst out of the water and swallowed Buster whole. My Texas was showing there. I have no idea if the tale was true, but I remembered Buster. He was a friendly and mischievous Springer Spaniel, and I remember my grandpa and my dad going fishing with him once, and Buster not coming back. The boat moved sideways as I anchored my feet against the side. Geez, this may not be Nessie, but it was a damn big fish. We'd be eating well tonight. Ted cut his line when he felt the boat bow down and anchored himself on the other side to help balance the boat while Johnny came over to my side with the net. Retching from midships proved our stabilizing retching from midships proved our stabilizing efforts weren't enough to prevent Green-gilled Bill from throwing up half a lung. I'm not sure it's working. It's supposed to be checking on the others. And instead, it seems to be insisting upon making me mess up my lines. I'll give it another chance. 2 hours later, we sat around the fire pit. Beer? It wasn't a question. Ted thrust a cold one into my hand. The smell of seared fish saturated the air. "How's Bill?" I asked. This was his first fishing trip, and it hadn't gone well. Not only had he gotten travel sick on the way getting here, he got seasick on the totally placid lake and couldn't hold down more than 2 beers at any time without throwing up. I wondered if they were even related, much less brothers. He'll be fine," Ted smirked. "But that Ivy League education, man, you'd think a medical student could stick the smell of roast fish, right? God help him if he ever has to stick his hands in anything really gruesome." I snickered, looking at the Wow. May have to re-record this later. I snickered, looking at the half of the huge catfish that barely fit on the oversized griddle we had fashioned out of the lid of a metal trash can. We could have cooked it on the stove in the lodge, but this was our last night before returning home from our annual fishing trip. This was ritual, and even if it had been raining sleet, we'd still be here, getting drunk around the fire. You know what? That's right. Getting drunk around the fire. I'm not going to build a fire in the studio, but I'm there with you, boys. Lost my spot. I'm not there with them anymore. Thankfully, the early November sky was clear. Fucking cold, though. I have friends and family members that refer to this book as Michael Learns to Cuss. I don't normally in my regular daily life, but yeah, it's acting, it's fine. Another few weeks and this whole valley would be white with freshly fallen snow. Winter came early in the North Dakota wilderness. I huddled closer, warming my hands on the fire. Johnny sat down beside me. It's okay to think of them. You know that, right? I sighed. I knew the guys had brought me up here to try to distract me, but nothing could take my mind off the fact it had been 2 years since Tommy had died, and around 1.5 years since Sherry had followed. A bitter pit boiled in my stomach. "It'll be okay, buddy." Johnny bumped my shoulder. He always could read my mind, and he knew I teetered on the brink of depression. "It wasn't your fault, you know." I snorted. I left a loaded gun in my house. Guilt rose again, roiling with the beer in my gut. My son, Tommy, had been disabled. It was nothing they could put a label on, but Sherry had known almost immediately that he was developmentally delayed. We fought for years to get his condition diagnosed appropriately. He saw every military pediatrician in the country, and the closest they could come was autism. That wasn't it, or that wasn't just it. I was a staff sergeant. Under normal circumstances, my military pay would have been more than adequate, and the coverage for Tommy's medical care was stellar, but it still wasn't enough. The normal military medical channels weren't cutting it, not for the kind of proactive medical care and the bills we were looking at for Tommy. In desperation, watching my wife and kid eat ramen noodles for the third night this week, I dialed the number. 14 digits and a ridiculous bureaucratic runaround before Essie Almanara came on the line. I still occasionally kept in touch with a few people from Graham Wyndham, but I had never called him before. We both knew why. He and I spoke for almost an hour on the telephone that Thursday evening. "Why are we taking Tommy to Bristol?" Sherry had snapped that at me Sunday afternoon as I found their passports. "There's nothing to do there, Jazz. The Zucchini Festival is months away, and seeing it once was enough. For God's sake, you've packed enough. For God's sake, you've packed enough for a week. Jazz, stop, listen to me. You know I can drive home and get something. Why in the world did you pack this bathing suit?" Sorry for the edits I'm going to have to do later. The thunder's getting loud. "Why are we taking Tommy to Bristol?" Sherry had snapped. Well, I already read that. I took the small wallet out of her purse, something I normally wouldn't do. Women's purses were no man's land at best, enemy territory at worst. Wow, that is something out there. I took the bills I had already separated and put them into her wallet, adding several more bills to the secret zippered compartment I wasn't supposed to know about. "Not Bristol up the road," I said, grabbing her hand and placing the passports and wallet atop it, clasping her hand firmly closed with my other. "Bristol, England, honey. It's somewhere near Wales, I think. You might even get a chance to sightsee." I saw them off Sunday, assuring her repeatedly that I heard of the new treatment option through a trusted source, and yes, everything was paid for. I spent the rest of the night making myself puke at the thought of what I was going to have to ask my gunny in the morning. I felt sick at the thought of leaving the Corps. Essie had assured me everything would work out exactly as he said, and I believed him. But, Christ, it felt like I was throwing away 14 years. I hear you, brother. Gunny Cooper and I were tight, as Marines often get when serving together, and I considered him a friend as well as a comrade. To my surprise, things went hell a lot smoother than they had any right to go. "I'm sorry to lose you, son," Gunny said, as he motioned me to take a seat, my well-prepared speech unspoken. "Hell of a good Marine. These are the preliminary separation documents. You need to sign here, here, and here. Top's already on the lookout for it. In a month or less, you will be an honorably discharged retired USMC staff sergeant." But retired, that meant the fuck? My head spun and Gunny leaned in close. I've never seen documents move so fast or with so many tails on them. Secretarial authority with full stripes and severance? Damn, you impressed someone, son. The way I heard it, 3 members of the Senate committees got on phone calls in the middle of the night, 2 of them from Homeland. These boys aren't playing around, son. This is happening yesterday. Normally don't drink when I'm narrating, doing commercials and cartoons and whatnot. Wonder if the ice is picking up. My apologies. And it did, figuratively, of course. I was on terminal leave in an absolutely unheard of 3 weeks. I still hadn't told Sherry what was happening. Every time we Skyped, she wouldn't let me get a word in edgewise, telling me how Tommy was actively communicating with her. Progress was irregular, but even a bad day in this place was amazing compared to a great day in the States. He had speech therapists, sign language therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, play therapists. It was incomprehensible to her. Her 2-year-old son was saying juice and cookie, not saying them, of course. His legs were being trained to walk. These specialists had Tommy discovered. What was that? Damn treaters. These specialists had Tommy. These specialists had discovered Tommy had some peculiar form of neuromotor dysfunction in addition to autism, and the dual nature of his condition went beyond the limits of all but a handful of specialists working in the amazing team out of England and Denmark. And they were all working on Tommy's behalf. I figured there would be enough time to tell Sherry I'd sold my soul to the devil another day. I started working as S.A. Alamera's personal security assistant exactly 1 month to the day I put Sherry and Tommy on the plane to not up the road Bristol. They still had several weeks before they would return home, so that gave me a bit of breathing room before the shit would hit the fan. Her brothers knew, of course, and they were as supportive as they were capable of being, which means they didn't beat the shit out of me. But not much else. The shit hit the fan, as I expected it would. We had a wonderful, loving reunion at the airport. My son cried when he saw me and hugged me so tight around the neck that I cried back. We were a mess, the three of us. We had an awesome dinner at the Wolf Den, and, to my surprise, Sherry ordered meatballs for Tommy, which he picked at with gusto. He still wasn't strong on eye contact, but I could definitely see progress with his motor function, and I was happy. And I was as happy as Sherry. Johnny's terms had been lenient. If I ever wanted to get laid again, I had to tell Sherry before we made whoop-de-doo, or the brothers would deliver the ass-kicking I deserved. When we settled Tommy into bed for the night, I told Sherry. She had heard a few of my stories about Esse, although she had never met him. She was, justifiably, terrified of him. I had gone over to the dark side, my wife claimed. She had shouted herself hoarse when she discovered I had already taken the job. But not even she could deny the amazing progress Tommy had already made. I reminded her Essie had the kind of resources we needed. She had softened, although there had been no welcome home lovemaking that night. She forgave me the next day, with misgivings. Essie and I went back a long way, so dancing for the devil wasn't as miserable as it could have been. 3 years later, I'd been in Mexico doing my job when Tommy found the gun I'd left with Sherry, just in case one of my Essie's competitors came after my family. It was a safeguard. It was never supposed to happen. I crushed the beer in my hand so hard the sharp edges bit into my palm. It was my fault, John. All of it was my fault. I was tempted to wallow in the past, the booze giving me the justification. But when I tried, all I could remember was the promise I'd made to my wife while she lay dying on her hospital bed. Tommy's death had made her give up on everything, and for months afterward, she had laid in her bed, swallowed by what we all thought was a horrible black depression. When we found out it was more, she even blamed herself for getting sick. Cancer didn't work like that, though. That was one of the few things I was sure about. She had looked me in the eye, and even though her face was ghost pale and her eyes almost translucent sockets, she was more beautiful than I could ever remember. No more dwelling, no recriminations, she said. Again and again, we said it. It became a mantra. She made me promise to get on with my life, and I had, mostly. The anniversaries were the hardest, but I had my friends, my adoptive family, to support me. Johnny held his hand out. I took it. Man, we got your back, always. We clinked cans, and I forced a smile. He'd done it again, blown away the cloud of depression with his ready smile and his uncanny ability to say the right thing at exactly the right time. He smirked as he looked at his brothers. Ted flipped a fillet of the monster catfish. I doubted it was big enough to eat Buster, but shit, it was still big. Bill was still green, but he had put the puke bucket away and watched the cooking process with interest, his glasses hiding a pair of incredibly intelligent eyes. He would make a great doctor if he could manage to overcome his queasiness. I smiled. These guys were my family. I'd always wondered at my luck whenever things slowed down enough so I could think over my life. My parents had died in a car crash when I was 9. I had no relatives, and my parents' money, whatever they'd possessed, had been swallowed up by funeral expenses and debt. I grew up in the Graham Wyndham Orphanage in New York City. For about 9 years, that was all I knew, and it wasn't so bad. I fostered in and out pretty regularly. Most of the foster parents were in it for the money, and their monthly stipend wasn't enough for them to put up with a smart-mouthed, angry, destructive kid. I had a stubborn streak a mile wide, and I knew my legal rights. Miss made sure every foster knew what wasn't permitted. My rights got violated a number of times, but I always, in one way or another, gave back worse than I got. Sugar in a gas tank is pretty effective when still hung-over foster dad had to get to work early the next day after kicking my ass the night before. Surprisingly, I never quite got adopted. So, I graduated out of the system at 18 and joined the Marine Corps. I had written to Miss, as we referred to the matron of the home, for years after leaving. We had kept in touch until she died the previous year. The best thing was, she wrote back. She cared. I appreciated that. There had always been a rumor she was a direct descendant of the person who had opened the place. Even her name was Liz, but she had always been Miss to me. I'd gone off the rails for a while, as a lot of orphans do. I got in with the wrong crowd and was this close to ending up in prison when she'd pulled me back. She pointed me toward the armed services. Her son had served in Vietnam. She had a picture of him in a locket she kept on a silver chain around her neck. I never saw the photo closely, and never saw the one on the other side of the locket at all. Miss always carried an air of sadness around with her. More than the loss of her boy, I thought. The locket carried another memory. I found my family when I joined the U.S. Marines as soon as I became 18. At the same time, I got my nickname, Jazz. My parents had named me Jason Zion Goldberg at my bris milah, the only gift of theirs I had left, besides the Timex watch I always wore. They had been a good Jewish family, as my name avows, but this lasted less than a day in boot camp at Paris Island. "What sort of mouthful of a name is that, son?" the tall, muscular redhead asked from the top bunk as I stowed my gear below him. I cringed. My name was all that remained from my parents' legacy, but it had been the brunt of many insults over the years. He jumped down off the bunk and slapped me on the back, leaning close to speak soft enough so only I heard. "Jason, you and me, we're going to be buddies, good buddies. I just know it." I didn't know why, but I believed him. And for the first time in years, I felt an unfamiliar feeling around someone I didn't know. Trust. But that name is going to get you a ton of grief in this shithole. He held his hand out. "I'm Johnny. Pleased to meet you, Jazz." I smiled, taking his proffered hand, gripping it firmly. Another younger man walked over from the direction of the toilet. Head. I had no idea why they were called heads, of all things. He was a younger copy of Johnny, and I blinked, surprised that would be permitted on Paris Island. Johnny smiled. "Jazz, meet my younger brother, Ted. He's a grumpy son of a bitch, but he'll shoot the nads off a gnat at 20 paces, if he doesn't fuck it first." He held his little pinky up and wiggled it. Probably fits. Ted snorted. "Fuck you, asshole." He reached over to shake hands. It was true. Even though clearly brothers, Ted's face was set in a permanent glower, but there was a humor in those deep eyes. "My brother here has a thing for goats. He'll go down on anything that tastes of cheese. My neighbor's daughter didn't even bother to wash anymore." Forgot about that. Johnny extended his middle finger, and we all laughed. Me hiding a bit of chagrin, I'll say. What would Miss think of this group of friends? We had become family the moment they found out I had none of my own, so most of my liberty time was spent with their folks in South Dakota. Mama and Dad O'Reilly claimed me as another son on my first visit. One moment. One of these times coincided with the most important moment of my life, when their kid sister, Sherry, was home from college. Cliche as it may have been, it was love at first sight, for me at least. Sherry, she took a little convincing, though not too much. Most of it was playing hard to get on her part. That was a big one. Edit. Most of it was playing hard to get on her part. The most difficult thing had been sneaking around behind her brother's backs. I hated doing that. And the moment we decided to come clean couldn't have happened soon enough for me. Coming out had been interesting. About time, bro, Johnny had smirked. You knew? All the time, you knew? The guffaws of Ted and his kid brother Bill drowned out any response. I had been well and truly snookered. I was amused, but Sherry was furious. She whirled on them and fixed each of them with a stare that could have cooled the merriment in 2 seconds flat. Could have. That cooled the merriment in 2 seconds flat. I can still remember her standing, eyes flashing and hands fisted on her hips. God, I loved her. John Patrick O'Reilly, I'm ashamed of you. How dare you embarrass Jazz like that? And just because you're my big brother, don't think I won't whoop your ass for this. Ted and Bill let out a, wow, I'm scared sound. And as for you, she continued, at least Jazz has a girlfriend, unlike you two goat fuckers. She turned... On camera this time, too. People can see me saying it. It's cool. She turned her back on them in disgust, and I saw the brothers exchange guilty glances. At the same time, I saw the glee in Sherry's pale blue eyes. She was playing them hard. Either Johnny's sixth sense or a slight reveal on my face must have alerted him. Sherry, Jazz, we're sorry. Johnny got up before the others. I'm sorry for keeping it a secret, bro, but geez, you were hardly subtle about it. And if it counts for anything, I don't think I'd rather have anyone else as a brother-in-law. That did it. Sherry rounded on him again. Brother-in-law? She gaped. I realized Johnny was playing her now, and I had trouble not laughing. We've only been going out a few months, you asshole. It's a bit early for that. Johnny put his hand up to silence her, adopting his best redneck persona. He puffed out. Here's where I shine. My redneck persona. He puffed out his chest or I don't. He puffed out his chest and I keep saying and. Did you notice? He puffed out his chest as he hooked his thumbs under his belt. Now, Sherry, you know the way it is up in these parts. He winked at his brothers as Sherry turned dangerous. Golly. He winked at his brothers as Sherry's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson at the patronization in his voice. He may as well have called her little lady. Once a man has submitted his intentions to court a lady, and once the lady agrees, well, you're officially engaged. Of course, Jazz will have to ask Pa's permission and all. Pa? When did we ever call Dad Pa? For a second, I thought Sherry might strike him. Ah, I just got an email from Remington Firearms. That worked. For a second, I thought Sherry might strike him as she walked quickly toward him, but at the last moment, she threw her arms around him. God, you're such an asshole. But that was one of the best rednecks you've ever done. It degenerated into laughter right away. The tension was gone, as if it hadn't existed. That night, I asked Sherry to marry me. She said yes. The next day, we had the last laugh on the brothers, and their befuddled expressions were priceless. We got married and had a kid, Tommy. Sherry knew he was developmentally delayed from the beginning, but the doctors couldn't confirm it until he was almost 8 months old, and it was another 1.5 years of hell until we got him into the Danish program, and he thrived. Even as a 4-year-old, Tommy was still wearing diapers and not quite verbal, but he knew some words. And in the areas in which he excelled, he was bright, inquisitive kid. He loved gadgets. Give him an old hand radio and a screwdriver, and he'd spend hours in absolute fascination until the thing was in 50 different pieces. Most of the time, he could put it back together in 40. Tommy's death had almost been the end of us. Sherry said she didn't blame me for leaving the gun. She said she blamed herself for keeping it in the bedside cabinet instead of locked away. I knew, deep down, she thought it was my fault. Way deeper than I'd ever admit. Part of me thought it was hers. It had been Johnny who yet again saved us. Sherry was in bed, as usual. It worried me, not because she wasn't working. Hell, she never had to work again if she didn't want to, but because the toll this depression was taking on her. Johnny came around one day, about 3 months after the funeral. "Tommy is dead," he said, his voice blunt and uncompromising. "And the way I see it, you guys have 2 choices." He held up a finger. 1. You can part ways. Get away from all the guilt and grief that each of you is holding. Oh, it'll take a while. Dealing with grief on your own is no easy thing, but I could understand if you chose that path. Sherry looked at me with tears in her eyes, and she silently mouthed, "No." I squeezed her hand tightly. 2. You can stay together and stop all this blaming each other bullshit and get on with your fucking lives. The last 2 words were raised in volume, but Johnny's face was a mask of calm. Both of us were stunned. Johnny got up. "I've said my piece, but at the end of the day, it's up to you guys to make up your minds." He paused at the door, turning back to look both of us in the eye. "You know which one all of us want to happen." Then he was gone. We sat there in stunned silence for a moment before Sherry dragged me into her arms, whispering, "I'm sorry," over and over. The same word flew from my lips as well, but after a while, Johnny's words stuck home. We agreed to start over. We took a drive out to Tommy's grave, putting fresh flowers on it and, finally, accepting his death. We knew he'd have wanted us to be happy. We tried. We stepped on tiptoe around each other. We remembered the love we had felt for each other, and slowly we started to heal. A month later, Sherry collapsed at work. Her friend, Joni, called me from the hospital, and I rushed right over. They did an MRI that same afternoon, which told me more than I was willing to know. A day later, the oncologist told us there was a tumor. Glio, she called it, for glioblastoma, the size of a tennis ball in Sherry's brain. It was already stage 4, far too late for anything other than palliative treatment. And it was lodged into a section of the brain likely to leave her in a vegetative condition if we opted for surgical removal. My world fell apart twice in what felt like a matter of moments. It didn't stop Sherry. She fought for every step of the way. And I was there with her, holding her hand while she slept, comforting her during the breakthrough pain, and sometimes crying along with her. She lasted a little over 2 months. I wondered what the boys would plan to distract me on that anniversary. But now, in the present, I drank the beer and ate the fish. We burped and farted, and I had to admit, I was a lucky SOB to have such friends. Well, there's the end of a very depressing chapter 1. It gets better and worse. And then worse again. And then there's a fun Trump bit. Trump. Not a place for a political ramble, but if you want to hear the opinion of a small town Texan, you just let me know. I'll tell you about Trump. Jerk. All right, chapter 1 of Treaters. Book 1 of The Divine Conflict by C.J. Rutherford, as narrated by a mildly inebriated Michael Abels.